Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Say what? Say what? Say what? One more time.
We kick things off with our signature segment, Say What, where we roll out a virtual assembly line of wacky, astonishing, and damnable things that are most revealing about politicians and the chattering class. We're coming up fast on 1 month since President Trump first sounded the corona alarm, and at least now we can talk about this with some modicum of perspective, at least through the glass, if darkly, and try to figure out when we might wake up from this nightmare. But we still don't know if it's 2 a.m. and the nightmare goes on for several more hours before we wake up, or if it's closer to 6 a.m. We're told this thing will peak by about tax day, April 15th, some kind of perfect irony there, and then begin to subside, but not, we're told, until somewhere between 100 and 240,000 Americans will die. And then, without a vaccine, it could come back when the weather gets cool again in the fall. But 100 to 240,000 deaths. Now, that's a big number to be sure. But for perspective, let's remember that 60,000 people died in 2017 alone from the flu. Credible experts agree that the corona toll could have been in the 2 million range with no intervention or mitigation, the kind of social distancing we're all doing now. And even at the upper range of that estimated death toll, 240,000, it represents 0.07% of the U.S. population, which is about 330 million people. At the low end, 100,000 deaths, it would be 0.03% of the population. Again, for perspective, 1% of the population would be 3 million. Now, numbers aren't great on radio, but you get the idea. Even those high-end estimates represent a relatively minuscule portion of our population. But the political climate surrounding corona has now all but reverted back to the same partisan poison before the outbreak. Democrats' chief talking point is, cleverly, something that can't be proved or disproved, much like conspiracy theories, that Trump's response was too slow and that will cost lives. Yes, it's Trump's fault, of course, and this is just another in a long line of Trump scandals, as Democrats see it. Another impeachable offense. Trump responded by saying he was distracted during the initial outbreak in January by the Ukraine impeachment thing, a charge which the Democrat leader, Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, said is deeply disturbing.
I think that's an admission that perhaps the president and the majority leader cannot handle the job. We have a life and death situation in our country, and they should not try to hide behind an excuse for why they did not take action, but it does admit that they did not take action. But that's for an after-action review down the road. Right now, we have to work together to get the job done. But what we had in our House bill, which was rejected by the Senate in this most recent bill, was directing the president to implement the Defense Production Act.
So the Democrat leader calls for full implementation of the Defense Production Act by calling it the Defense Protection Act. Can't even get the name of what she's demanding straight. And goes full-on political in the midst of a national health crisis. And now she says she'll, what else? Begin an investigation into Trump's conduct during the corona crisis. You know, in some sense, it's nice to know for the sake of stability that while most of the world has changed in this crisis, the Democrats have not. Another tentacle of the Democrats' political offensive against a president trying to fight off a killer virus is the growing complaints about his daily press briefings, which give him national TV exposure every day at the dinner hour with everyone home everywhere. So, in the left's one-step thinking, best to simply stop covering them. And leading the band on that is one of the high-profile members of the Trump-deranged media, and as I like to call him, the most appropriately named man on TV, CNN's Don Lemon.
I don't think that you should really listen to what he says. You should listen to what the experts say. I'm not actually sure, if you want to be honest, that we should carry that live. I think we should run snippets. I think we should do it afterwards and get the pertinent points to the American people, because he's never, ever going to tell you the truth.
So Don Lemon and his cohorts in the Trump-deranged media believe the way to help in the crisis is to call the president, the only president we have during this crisis, like it or not, a liar. Yeah, that's helpful. Democrats didn't even do that to George W. Bush after 9/11. And Joe Biden jumped aboard the Corona Attack Trump train as well with the unveiling of his new podcast, which we'll discuss a bit later in the show. But one of the things that really snapped people to attention during this crisis was famous people getting the virus. Among them, another of the most Trump-deranged anchors on CNN and brother of the New York governor, Chris Cuomo.
We do not have the testing data to make real sense of our reality beyond what we know is the face of it for an overwhelming number who get sick. And that face is mine. I tested positive. Scary. Yes, as you might imagine, but better me than you. My concern is what I may have put on my family, just like you would. That is hurting me way more than anything a virus can do. So let's focus. Let's use this example of me having it as proof that you can get it too, God forbid.
And the list of famous people and celebrities who now have the virus continues to grow. Actor Tom Hanks and wife Rita Wilson, basketball star Kevin Durant, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, even Prince Charles.
Having recently gone through the process of contracting this coronavirus, luckily with relatively mild symptoms, I now find myself on the other side of the illness, but still in no less a state of social distance and general isolation. As we're all learning, this is a strange, frustrating and often distressing experience when the presence of family and friends is no longer possible and the normal structures of life are suddenly removed.
You know, the fact that this virus struck down the future King of England should teach all of us a lesson in humility about ourselves. Talk about humble. From Prince Charles on down to the homeless man on the street, all of mankind has been thwarted by a virus from a bat. A virus from a bat. If that doesn't humble you, nothing will. And we'll be back to discuss the response of private industry to the corona crisis and how the president had to use some serious leverage to get General Motors, for one, to do the right thing.